In the quiet, dust-filled archives of our collective memory, the grand narrative of human history is carefully preserved. It's a story we are all told, a simple, linear ascent, from the first sharpened stone to the bronze spear, to the age of steam, and finally, to the digital blow of our modern world. It is a comfortable tale of slow, steady progress, a predictable climb from primitive beginnings to technological supremacy. But deep within the earth, and in the forgotten corners of museum vaults, lie objects that refuse to fit this neat and orderly tale. Technological phantoms from an impossible past. They are the glitches in the timeline, artifacts of such baffling sophistication and anachronistic design that they whisper of a profoundly different story. These are not mere curiosities. They are profound, uncomfortable questions cast in stone and metal. They suggest that our past is not a straight line, but perhaps a cycle of rising and falling, of lost golden ages and forgotten sciences. They force us to wonder if ancient civilizations reached technological peaks that were then catastrophically lost, only to be slowly rediscovered millennia later. These objects are the tangible evidence, the echoes of a forgotten world that threaten to shatter our established timeline. To begin our investigation into this lost chapter of history, we must first travel to a place that precedes the pyramids, Stonehenge, and even the invention of pottery. A place that by its very existence rewrites everything we thought we knew about the dawn of human civilization.
High on a barren ridge in southeastern Anatolia, a place the locals call Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill, the story of our past was broken wide open. For millennia, this unremarkable mound was thought to be nothing more than a medieval cemetery, its secrets sleeping beneath layers of earth and time. Until 1994, when archaeologist Klaus Schmidt looked closer and saw not headstones, but the tops of immense, deliberately shaped pillars. What he and his team began to unearth would not just challenge a few academic theories, it would detonate the very foundations of prehistoric human history. The accepted timeline, the one taught for generations, was clear and simple. 12,000 years ago, at the twilight of the last ice age, humanity existed in small, scattered, nomadic bands. They were hunter-gatherers, their lives dictated by the seasons and the migration of animals. They had not yet invented pottery, metallurgy, or even writing. And most critically, they had not yet developed agriculture. Without the surplus of food that farming provides, they could not have established large permanent settlements, let alone the complex social structures required for monumental construction projects. This was considered an undisputed fact of our development. But Göbekli Tepe stands in defiant contradiction to that fact. What lies beneath that hill is not a village, not a settlement, but a sprawling complex of massive, megalithic temples. The oldest layers date back to an astonishing 10,000 BC. That is 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza, 6,000 years before Stonehenge. This is the zero point of monumental architecture, and it appeared as if from nowhere. The site consists of at least 20 enormous circular enclosures. At the center of these circles stand pairs of monolithic T-shaped pillars weighing up to 15 tons and towering 18 feet high.
These are not crude rocks. They are elegant, highly stylized representations of humanoids, and they are covered in exquisitely carved reliefs of animals, venomous snakes, powerful lions, scorpions, and vultures. This is a symbolic library from a time before words, a gallery of a forgotten mythology. The sheer logistics of its creation are staggering. How did a society of hunter-gatherers with only the most primitive of stone tools quarry these massive blocks from a nearby hillside? How did they transport them and then lift them into precise upright positions? This level of construction requires planners, engineers, and a large, coordinated labor force. It requires feeding and housing hundreds of workers for months, if not years. It necessitates a shared ideology, a powerful belief system so compelling that it could unite disparate tribes in a single, colossal undertaking. It requires civilization. And yet, it exists in a time when we believed no civilization was possible. This paradox has forced a profound reevaluation of our past. Schmidt himself proposed a revolutionary idea. The accepted sequence of events was backward. Humanity did not invent farming, then build temples. Instead, it was the collective will to build a sacred place like Göbekli Tepe that spurred humanity to innovate. The immense effort may have been the very catalyst that led to the domestication of wheat and the birth of agriculture, simply to feed the builders. The temple came first. Religion was not a byproduct of settlement, it was the engine. But who were these people? What astronomical knowledge did they possess, as some researchers suggest the pillars aligned with the stars? And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is why, after 2,000 years of use, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately and carefully buried. Around 8,000 BC, their creators filled every enclosure with debris, entombing their sacred work under tons of earth, preserving it perfectly for a distant future they could never have imagined. Why hide a masterpiece? Were they protecting it, or was their work complete? Göbekli Tepe leaves us with the unsettling realization that a sophisticated, organized, and spiritually complex culture thrived in the Stone Age, only to vanish, leaving behind a single, monumental enigma. Their genius was expressed in stone, but it forces us to ask what other forms of ancient knowledge have been lost. What if another, equally brilliant culture expressed its genius not in megaliths, but in something far more complex and impossibly intricate? Genius can be expressed in many forms. In the monumental stones of a forgotten temple, we see the ambition of a collective. But sometimes, genius is quieter, more precise. It can hide within a single object, a testament not to communal effort, but to a level of individual intellect so far advanced it appears almost alien to its time. To find this ghost of a forgotten science, we must leave the sun-scorched hills of Turkey and journey into the deep,
silent darkness of the Aegean Sea. In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers took shelter from a storm near the small island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they dived and stumbled upon the remains of an ancient Roman cargo ship wrecked nearly 2,000 years before. The site was a treasure trove of the classical world: marble statues, elegant glassware, and priceless pottery. And among the treasures brought to the surface in 1901 was a corroded, unassuming lump of bronze, no larger than a modern laptop. For decades, it sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, largely ignored, dismissed as a part of a statue or perhaps a curiously complex piece of naval equipment. It was an artifact without a category. Because, according to the official history of technology, it simply could not exist. The mainstream understanding was that while the ancient Greeks were masters of geometry and philosophy, their engineering was largely limited to civil and military applications. The concept of fine, intricate clockwork, precision gearing for complex calculations, was a world away, an invention that belonged to the great cathedral clocks of Renaissance Europe, more than 1,000 years in the future.
But as the decades passed, researchers began to probe the corroded lump with ever more advanced technology. First with X-rays, and then with state-of-the-art computer tomography. And as the murky interior was slowly revealed, layer by layer, the academic world was stunned into disbelief. Hidden within the calcified bronze was not a simple mechanism, but a breathtakingly complex clockwork universe. At least 30 distinct hand-cut bronze gears were interlocked in a system of staggering sophistication. This was not a simple navigational aid. This was an astronomical computer. Inscriptions deciphered from its surfaces revealed its purpose. By turning a single hand crank, the user could predict the position of the sun and the moon against the zodiac. It modeled the phases of the moon. It predicted solar and lunar eclipses with startling accuracy. It even accounted for the subtle irregularities in the moon's orbit using a brilliant pin and slot mechanism, a level of mechanical theory that would not be seen again until the 16th century. Beyond the heavens, it had a practical purpose, tracking the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. It was a mechanical cosmos in a box, a complete philosophical and scientific model of the universe as the Greeks understood it. Its existence shatters our timeline of technological progress. It is a sudden, inexplicable peak of mechanical genius with no known predecessors and no successors for 1,500 years. The question is not just how they built it, but who? Scholars speculate it may have originated on the island of Rhodes, a hub of Hellenistic astronomy, where the great astronomer Hipparchus worked. But no writings from him or anyone else describe such a device. It is a complete orphan of history. Was the Antikythera mechanism a singular, miraculous invention, the work of one lone Da Vinci of the ancient world? Or is it something far more unsettling? Is it merely the last survivor, the only remaining example of a long and sophisticated tradition
of mechanical engineering that has been almost entirely erased from the historical record. Perhaps the ancients built countless such devices, masterpieces of bronze and brass that have all since corroded into dust, leaving this one ghost to tell their tale. The mechanism proves that at least some ancient minds conceived of the cosmos not just through myth and poetry, but as a predictable, rational, clockwork system. They possessed a paradigm of mechanical science we thought was born in the Renaissance. This legacy of precision and calculation, lost to the sea for 2 millennia, opens up a profound question. If they applied this level of sophisticated measurement to the heavens, what happened when they applied it to the earth itself? What if this lost science of geometry and projection created not just celestial computers, but terrestrial maps, maps of a world that, according to our history, they should not have been able to see?
In the hushed, climate-controlled archives of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace lies a fragment of a world that should not exist. Drawn on a delicate sheet of gazelle skin parchment, it is a symphony of coastlines, islands, and cryptic notations. This is the surviving portion of the first world map of Piri Reis, an admiral of the Ottoman fleet. The year of its creation is 1513. At first glance, it is a masterpiece of its time, a stunningly Renaissance cartography merging the known world with the newly discovered lands of the West. Its lines are rendered with a confidence and an accuracy that is, in itself, remarkable. But to look closer is to gaze into an abyss of history, a mystery that unravels our very understanding of the past. The mainstream historical view presents a clear and logical explanation. Piri Reis was a brilliant mariner and a meticulous scholar. On the map itself, he wrote that he had consulted over 20 source maps and charts, including 8 Ptolemaic maps, an Arabic map of India, 4 Portuguese maps, and even a lost map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself. Academics laud the map for its stunningly precise depiction of the western coasts of Europe and North Africa and the coast of Brazil. For the 16th century, this was the pinnacle of cartographic knowledge. It is celebrated as a masterful synthesis, the work of a genius who stood at the crossroads of ancient knowledge and the great age of discovery, weaving them together into a single, coherent vision of the world, a triumph of compilation, a testament to one man's dedication. But this comfortable explanation begins to fray when our eyes drift to the very bottom of the parchment. There, extending eastward from the tip of South America, is a landmass that is both familiar and utterly alien. The coastline depicted is unmistakably the northern coast of Antarctica. This is the first impossibility. The continent of Antarctica would not be officially discovered by modern explorers for another 300 years in 1820. How could Piri Reis have known of its existence? The mystery, however, goes deeper. The true enigma is not that Antarctica is on the map, but how it is on the map. The coastline shown is not the one we see today, a sheer cliff of ice. Instead, The Piri Reis map charts the bays, inlets, and river mouths of the actual landmass, the continent beneath the ice. It shows the coast of Queen Maud Land as it would.
Piri Reis provides a clue. He stated his map was based on far more ancient sources. This admission has led to a breathtaking theory, one championed by scholars like Professor Charles Hapgood, whose research famously captured the attention and respect of Albert Einstein. Hapgood proposed that Piri Reis never saw Antarctica. He was merely a copyist. He had in his possession a chart derived from sources of almost unimaginable antiquity, maps created by a forgotten maritime civilization with a mastery of the globe. This was no primitive culture. To map the world with this level of precision, particularly in terms of relative longitude, would have required advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomical knowledge, and chronometers for accurate timekeeping, an invention not perfected until the 18th century. This lost civilization, the theory suggests, would have explored and charted the entire planet during a much earlier epoch, a time when Queen Maud Land was free of ice. This wasn't a map of the 16th century, but a cartographic ghost, an echo from a time before the ice came, passed down through millennia from one hand to another until it landed in the workshop of an unsuspecting Ottoman admiral. The Piri Reis map does not exist in a vacuum. It is part of a disturbing and fascinating pattern. Other maps from the era, like the Orentius Phineus map of 1531, also show a detailed ice-free Antarctica, complete with accurate mountain ranges and rivers, where today there are only glaciers. These are not isolated mistakes or flights of fancy. They are consistent, detailed portraits of a world out of time. They suggest that the cartographers of the Renaissance may have been the unwitting inheritors of a profound legacy, the last remnants of a complete and ancient global survey conducted by a culture lost to the mists of a forgotten prehistory. These parchments are more than just maps. They are artifacts that challenge the fundamental timeline of human civilization. They whisper of a past where the oceans were navigated and the world was known long before the history we are taught in schools ever began. They force us to wonder what other knowledge, what other sciences and stories were lost in the cataclysms that erased these master mariners from our memory. The map is a message in a bottle, a fragment of a world we were never meant to see. It begs a final, haunting question. If they charted the Earth with such impossible precision on parchment, what other legacies might they have left behind, cast not in ink, but in stone? Deep beneath the golden sands of Egypt, within the subterranean crypts of the Hathor Temple at Dendera, the air is still and heavy with the passage of millennia. The cartouche-covered walls are a library of stone, depicting the gods and rituals of a civilization that measured its own history in dynasties. But here, in the oppressive darkness, one set of reliefs stands apart, profoundly strange and unnervingly modern. Carved into the limestone is a large, clear, pear-shaped object. Inside it, a long, wavy line, a serpent
snakes its way from a flower-like socket at one end to the other. A cable, braided and distinct, connects this socket to a box upon which a god kneels. For a modern eye, the image is inescapable. It is a giant light bulb, complete with a filament, a socket, and a power source. According to mainstream Egyptology, what we are seeing is not technology, but theology. The explanation is one of rich, complex symbolism. The bulb-like shape, they say, represents the womb of the sky goddess Nut. The snake-like filament is the god Harsamtus, a form of Horus, symbolizing the rising sun being born from a lotus flower, the socket. The so-called cable is merely a celestial stream, and the box is a jed pillar, the symbolic backbone of the god Osiris, representing stability. For Orthodox academics, the case is closed. The Dendera light is a sophisticated mythological portrait of creation, a purely religious concept carved in stone. It is a beautiful myth, nothing more. But what if a myth was the only way the ancients knew to preserve the memory of a lost science? What if the depiction at Dendera was not just a story, but a diagram? For evidence of a practical application, we must travel 1,000 miles away, from the Nile Valley to the plains of Mesopotamia, to a dusty museum shelf in modern-day Iraq. The artifact is humble, almost comically simple. A small clay jar, just 5 inches high. Inside, a cylinder of sheet copper is sealed with asphalt. Suspended in its center, but not touching the sides, is a simple iron rod. Discovered in 1936, it was labeled a ritual object and largely forgotten. It is known today as the Baghdad Battery. Because when this simple clay pot is filled with an acidic electrolyte, something as common as vinegar or grape juice, it produces a steady electrical current of about 1 volt. It is, in its most basic form, a galvanic cell, a battery. Dated to sometime around 200 BCE, it predates Alessandro Volta's invention of the battery by 2,000 years. Here, an ocean of sand away from Dendera's carving, we find not a depiction of power, but a potential source for it.
The existence of a functional ancient battery shatters our assumptions. The most conservative theory suggests these devices were used for a simple form of electroplating, gilding jewelry with a micro-thin layer of gold. But could they have been used for more? Imagine these batteries, these galvanic cells, linked together in series, their voltage multiplying with each addition. Could they generate enough power to produce a visible, usable light? We return to Egypt and to a persistent architectural mystery, the complete lack of soot on the ceilings of so many deep tombs and underground passages. The accepted theory involves complex and inefficient systems of polished copper mirrors used to reflect sunlight deep into the earth. But an alternative solution presents itself, one that is clean, efficient, and eerily corroborated by the carvings at Dendera. The theory suggests the Egyptians had a form of electrical lighting, that the relief is not a myth, but a schematic, a sacred blueprint left by the descendants of those who still remembered how to harness this clean, silent power to illuminate their most sacred spaces. The Baghdad Battery and the Dendera Light, two whispers from two separate cultures, hint at a shared, forgotten knowledge. They suggest a chapter of human history has been torn from our books, a chapter in which our ancestors were not primitive, but pioneers of a science we thought was our own. This was not just a different past, it was a different path of technological development, one that vanished almost without a trace. This ability to generate power, even on a small scale, opens a doorway to a forgotten world of possibilities. It forces us to look again at their greatest achievements, not as feats of brute force, but of lost science. If they could illuminate the darkness within their tombs, what forces did they command to shape the colossal stones that built their world? Imagine a hidden museum, a room filled not with the treasures of known kings or the pottery of recognized cultures, but with the impossible. A cabinet of curiosities for history itself. On its shelves sit objects that defy our timeline. Artifacts that whisper of a past so deep it has been crushed into geological oblivion. Our first exhibit comes from a story told in the newspapers of 1852. In Dorchester, Massachusetts, a powerful blast was used to clear rock from a quarry. After the dust settled and the smoke cleared, workers found, amidst the rubble, two halves of a metal pot. Blasted from within solid 600-million-year-old conglomerate rock was a bell-shaped vessel made of a zinc-silver alloy, exquisitely inlaid with floral patterns in pure silver. The Dorchester pot, a delicate work of art from a time before the first dinosaurs, before complex life had even truly conquered the land. Confronted with such an anomaly, the scientific method demands skepticism. These objects are known as OOPArts, or out-of-place artifacts, and the mainstream approach is to analyze each one in isolation, seeking the simplest explanation. The Dorchester pot, it is argued, was likely a contemporary Victorian piece, perhaps a candlestick holder that was simply lying nearby and became mixed in with the debris of the blast. The story, it is suggested, was embellished over time. Similarly, other famous OOPArts are given conventional explanations. The Klerksdorp spheres, metallic-looking orbs found in 2.8 billion-year-old rock in South Africa, are dismissed as concretions, natural mineral formations that can sometimes form in perfect spheres. For every impossible artifact, a plausible, mundane explanation is sought. The goal is to resolve the anomaly and preserve the established timeline of history. But to dismiss each piece of evidence individually is to risk missing the forest for the trees. While any single object can be explained away as a mistake, a misidentification, or a hoax, the cabinet of curiosities continues to fill. The sheer volume and variety of these anomalies begin to challenge the simple explanations. Let us look again at the Klerksdorp spheres. While many are simple spheroids, others are anything but natural. Some are found to be perfectly balanced. More impossibly, some feature multiple perfectly parallel grooves running around their equator, as if machined on a lathe. Natural geological forces can create spheres, but can they machine them with such precision?
The list goes on. The Koso artifact, what appears to be a modern spark plug encased in a 500,000-year-old geode. The Ayud wedge, an aluminum object of clear artificial design, found buried beside mastodon bones from 20,000 years ago, long before humans were supposed to have developed aluminum metallurgy. Tiny metallic spirals, measured in fractions of a millimeter, found in 100,000-year-old soil layers in the Ural Mountains. Individually, they are curiosities. Collectively, they become a chorus, singing of a history we have never known. What if these objects are not out of place at all? What if, instead, our timeline is simply wrong? This is the foundation of a radical alternative theory, that these artifacts are the last surviving remnants of one, or perhaps many, advanced civilizations from the deep past. This theory suggests we are not the first industrial society on this planet. Others rose, thrived, and fell into ruin millions of years before our own species even evolved. They worked with metals, understood complex machinery, and perhaps even harnessed forces we are only just beginning to rediscover. What we find is not their grand monuments. Time grinds mountains to dust, let alone cities. We find their refuse, their lost tools, their discarded machine parts, their dropped vases, the small, incredibly durable objects that could survive the crushing pressure and unimaginable timescale of geological processes. This archaeological evidence does not point to a forgotten human kingdom. The ages involved, hundreds of millions, even billions of years, are so vast they preclude any connection to Homo sapiens. If this theory holds true, we are looking at the legacy of a pre-human intelligence on Earth. We are sifting through the wreckage of worlds or worlds that existed in an epoch we can barely comprehend. The pyramids and temples we study are but yesterday's news. These humble, impossible objects, a metal sphere, a tiny coil, a simple pot, could be the only remaining proof that the story of intelligent life on this planet is far older and far stranger than we have ever allowed ourselves to imagine. They are the true ancient aliens, and their home was Earth. These small, indestructible whispers of lost worlds challenge our very place in the cosmos. They suggest that the story of life on this planet may be a palimpsest, a text written, erased, and written over again, with our own civilization being merely the latest entry. It forces us to ask the most fundamental question of all. If we are not the first advanced civilization to call this planet home, are we destined to be the last?
We have journeyed to the edge of the historical map, through archives of impossible cartography, into the crypts of forgotten power, and deep into the geological bedrock of time itself. The artifacts we have witnessed, the map, the battery, the machine spheres, are more than just anomalies. To view them as isolated curiosities is to miss their collective, thunderous message. They are fragments of a history that has been shattered, pieces of a puzzle we are only now beginning to reassemble. These relics suggest that the story of our world is not a simple, linear ascent from primitive to modern. Instead, It appears to be a history of cycles, of brilliant civilizations that rise, master their world in ways we still do not understand, and then vanish, leaving behind only faint, indestructible echoes of their greatness. The evidence points not to a past that was simpler than our present, but to one that was profoundly different, possessing a lost science and a forgotten understanding of the cosmos. Perhaps the greatest mystery then is not what these objects are, but what they represent, the sheer scale of our own ignorance. They prove that there are unwritten chapters, entire volumes of the human and perhaps non-human story buried right beneath our feet. We are a species with amnesia, living amongst the ruins of a past we have yet to discover. The search for who we are has only just begun.